and welcome to our Tuesday night health masterclass. It's so much more. And tonight is part 2 of digestion, right? And so we started with part 1 last week. And so we're going into part 2 this week. So let's get this started. Here we go. And so this week, like I said, we're talking about digestion part 2, leaky gut, and the truth about food intolerance and the effects of these things on your optimal wellness. Now, throughout this entire series, right, we have been talking about the mind-body connection to optimal wellness. And this is really the mind-body wellness series. And so we've been following our roadmap to optimal wellness, which is balance, lift, clarify, and calm. And so we're starting with, of course, pillar 1 was balance, and that's balancing cellular fuel delivery. And then pillar 2 is lifting metabolic and immune function. And then pillar 3 is clarifying toxic buildup and stabilizing endocrine function. And then, of course, the final step in our roadmap is calming daily stress and restoring nutritional energy. And so when we talked about balancing cellular fuel delivery, we talked about circulation and blood sugar balance and how those are primary functions in our wellness. And then last week, when we started on digestion, we talked about how digestion is really kind of the bridge from fuel delivery to metabolic and immune function, right? And so just to review, just so everybody's caught up, because I know we have new people on tonight. So just to review, so we're all on the same page. Last week, we talked about digestion, and we talked about how it kind of, it starts at the top, right? And it comes all the way down, but digestion affects every single phase of our body. So digestion not only affects the gut, but the heart, the brain, the immune system, the hormonal system, and everything. Just like we talked with circulation, with blood sugar, and now digestion, all of these things affect everything. So we are like one magical orchestra of chemical processes, right, in our body. And so this really affects everything systemically. And so we talked about what is digestion, the act or process of converting food into chemical substances that can be absorbed into the bloodstream and be utilized by body tissues, which the body uses for energy, for growth, and cell repair needed to survive. The digestion process also involves creating waste, right, that need to be eliminated. So anytime there's a problem with digestion, we talked about we want to start from the north and go to the south. So the most northern part, the highest part of digestion actually starts in the brain. Most people don't always think about the brain as part of our digestive system, but brain function is what controls the whole system, right? And then there's 3 phases to digestion. We start with the cephalic phase, which is everything about the neck, right? Which is your brain. It starts in your mouth where we're chewing and really, creating really good digestive habits by chewing really, really well. And then the second phase is in our gastric phase, which is coming down into the stomach area, right? And this is where our liver and our pancreas is all supporting in here, with bile and with pancreatic enzymes and all the good stuff. And then our third phase of digestion is down into our intestinal phase, right? So and intestinal phase is the small intestine down into the large intestine. And then as we move on out south, through the end of the digestive system. So now we're moving on to the part of digestion, and really, this is the bridge, right? We really focused in on digestion and how it works last week. And now we're really moving into immune function. So in this picture, this is a picture of what would be like the small intestinal tract, right? And these are the cells that line the tube of your small intestine. And this lining of cells is literally one cell layer thick. right? So versus your skin has multiple dermal layers, the intestinal lining is just one cell layer thick, right? And these intestinal cells are like these little microvilli, and the individual cells are like bricks, right? And they make up all the cells like this, right? Like they're like sitting there like bricks, right? Like you see in this picture. And of course, this red part down here is your blood vessel, right? Because outside of the intestinal tract, you have blood vessels so that we can have nutrient exchange in and out. So just to give you a quick, this is like the quick anatomy, sciencey part, right? There's a protein that actually holds these cells together, right? And it's called occludin, and it means to occlude or to block something, right? And so these proteins basically form what is called a tight junction. And so it should look like this, right? Nothing's really getting through. And the reason why that's important is it wants to keep the large particles out from the bloodstream down here. And so little bitty things get through this gap just fine, right? So proteins break down into amino acids and they fit through that gap really easily. Carbs break down into simple sugars like glucose, and it fits through the gap really easily. So it can get into our bloodstream and it can be taken to our cells through our circulatory system, right? And that's how we get the nutrients into our cells so that our cells can then create energy and we can have waste transfer and all that kind of good stuff. Now, there's also, and so the idea here is that you don't want large molecules getting through the gap, right? Because it's not good. Our body's not designed to have large molecules floating through our circulatory system. Now, there's a protein that actually holds the cells, and this protein is not just any protein, right? And so this protein's down here, and it's actually a muscle tissue, right? And it's capable of contraction. And now this muscle tissue is called actin, right? So these muscles, when they pull, it pulls the gap in the opposite direction. So that's what you see over here. It pulls and it makes a gap. And it creates the gap in the opposite direction. Now, what's interesting is this is actually supposed to happen. And I actually have people ask me, they're like, well, is leaky gut actually a normal process? Well, technically it is, because it turns out that all mammals who give birth vaginally, like humans do, and who nurse their young, like through breastfeeding, all mammals have leaky gut at birth. And the reason why we have leaky gut at birth is because when we go through the vaginal canal at birth, we get a transference from the mom to the baby of the immune system, right? And then that transference of the immune system continues after baby is born through breastfeeding. And so the way that works is it needs to go through right here in this through this intestinal lining, all those immune cells, so that the immune system development can happen. So really, this is kind of like the supermarket door, right? It's like an electric sliding door at the supermarket. And normally you go in and then it shuts behind you, and that's like to keep the bugs and different, things out of the store. But when you come up, the eye sees you and it will reopen again. And so that's really the way that our gut is supposed to work. But this requires regular maintenance, right? It's kind of like you wouldn't just wash your car once and then never wash your car again, right? Because the car gets dirty again, right? Like it rains and there's dirt on it and it gets dirty. So then we wash it again. So our gut lining is kind of like that. It requires regular maintenance to keep it in its optimal state. Now, the significant thing is that this leaky gut process, which the scientific term is actually intestinal permeability, it's really a normal process, right? And the reason why it benefits us through our life is really like for infection. So the doctor that discovered really discovered leaky gut and wrote the original papers, is Dr. Fasano, and he was really doing research on cholera. And what he discovered was that this process of opening up the gut lining on purpose was actually connected to infection. So it turns out that on your intestinal cell surface, you have a receptor, and those receptors detect infection. And so when he discovered this research on cholera, he discovered that cholera is obviously a severe GI infection, and it comes from drinking dirty water, and it causes severe diarrhea. And it has become an epidemic in some parts of the world at some times in history. And so if you get cholera in your system, in your intestinal system from drinking dirty water, it latches on to your intestinal receptor. And what happens is in the nucleus, because every single cell, right, has a nucleus, right? What happens is that in the nucleus, there is immediately a protein that begins to produce. It's a novel protein. It's called zonulin. Now, this is just some science. And it is stimulated and produced due to this infection or inflammatory process. Now, what it causes is the actin protein muscle that is designed to pull apart. Zonulin actually causes that actin to pull apart in the opposite direction so that the body can grab onto the infection and pull it into the blood. Now, why would it want to do this, right? Well, there's something really, really cool that happens in our blood vessels that has to do with our immune system. It's called, we have white blood cells, right? And we also have, the white blood cells have natural killer cells, and these immune cells attack the infection that was pulled into the blood system. So this is actually really important, because if we get any type of gut infections, like, and it doesn't have to be cholera, it can be really any type of bug in our intestine, we have this mechanism that will literally pull the bug out of our intestinal system into the blood vessels so that the immune system can attack it and kill it, because that's what's supposed to happen, right? Well, what happens is that many people have chronic infection, right? They have chronic dysbiosis. Their intestinal cells are constantly being bombarded with infections. And this can happen from a lot of different things. We talked about it last week about how if our enzymes and our stomach acids are not correct, we can actually ingest a lot of toxins just from our natural environment, from our food, from the air, all the things. And so lots of infections can come in through our intestinal system. So what happens is you're constantly getting bombarded with these infections. And it's kind of like when the supermarket door is just open all the time and it never shuts, right? So if you think about it, like if the supermarket, if something's wrong with their door and it's stuck open, and say it's the middle of the night and the store is closed, but the door is still open, well, things are going to get into the store, right? And it's going to be chaos inside, right? And so that's what happens when we have this leaky gut that's like kind of stuck open all the time. Now, what's important to know about leaky gut is this is related to food sensitivity. So it turns out that many of the foods and different proteins and things in our body, and I'm going to use gluten for an example, are very, very large molecules that normally, in this example of the normal gut, would never get through, right? Would never get through the gut, never get through these tight junctions. And our body would just continue to break it down and push it on through and eliminate it as waste. But what happens is it turns out that gluten, as well as other foods, food molecules, but we're going to use gluten as an example, can latch on to the same intestinal receptor here as cholera does. And so gluten actually triggers this zonulin release, just like cholera does, and causes the actin proteins to pull this apart, right, to create this gap, just like cholera does. and then pull the gluten molecule into the bloodstream. Well, that's no bueno, right? That's not good, because our body does not like to have intact protein in the blood, right? Dietary protein needs to be broken down into amino acids, just like carbs need to be broken down into simple carbs, like sugars, like glucose. So when you have these large molecules that did not get broken down properly in the blood, right? The immune system goes crazy, right? And it's like, oh man, we got to get that. We need to go on attack, right? And so they get down there, and you have these immune cells. They're called T cells, right? And then you have these cells. They make antibodies. And so now you get these antibodies. So now you're attacking those proteins that don't belong in there, and you get these antibodies in your immune system. And what they do is, these antibodies' job is to tag the bad guy, right? Like they're like, oh, that's a bad guy. So next time our body sees it, like another time we eat, our body can immediately go into response again, right? And it can fight it faster. Now, this is why, this is great when we're talking about viruses, right? This is great when we're talking about other things that we need to build our immunity against. But what happens in these cases is that the body is reacting to something that's foreign, right? And so you develop this antibody against these proteins. And what happens is, once you develop the antibody, every subsequent time your body sees that molecule, like in this case, gluten, it triggers more antibody response, right? And that means that it's triggering the immune inflammatory response every single time. And the reason is because the body thinks that it's a foreign invader. Now, what happens is this inflammation is not just limited to the gut, right? Because once these invaders get into this bloodstream, right? The blood vessel, it's now systemic, because the heart beats and blood circulates throughout the entire body, right? And so what happens is this inflammation, designed by our immune system, goes systemic throughout the entire body. And so some of the symptoms that we see when we're having this process don't necessarily look like stomach pain, right? Or things like that. It could be joint pain. It could be arthritis. It could be stiffness, right? It could be swelling, pain, brain fog, all kinds of things. And what happens is, as it's systemic, it gets up and creates brain inflammation. And you even get like what they call now leaky brain, which in a couple of weeks, we're going to be talking specifically about the brain and those types of things that come from that. But the thing that is important is that when the immune system develops this antibody against any type of foreign invaders or microbes, after, what it'll also do is it will start to attack the tissues as well. And the reason why it's doing that is it's an attempt to clean up any cellular debris or damaged tissue. So this is oftentimes what we consider like autoimmune disease, right? Where the body's attacking its own tissue. And I will tell you that most autoimmune disease, right before the autoimmune disease, this process is happening, right? So when we talk about root cause and going back to the root cause, right? So before we talk about immune system, or before we talk about autoimmune and immunity, we have to go back to this leaky gut digestion piece. And obviously, we start from the beginning of the roadmap. Now, what's interesting is there are no drugs to treat this process. There's no drugs to treat leaky gut. The way you fix leaky gut is by nutrition and lifestyle, right? It's by getting rid of the underlying triggers like infections, toxins, parasites, pathogens. It's about, looking at the vagus nerve and calming the brain and calming stress, right? And to be honest, not only is there no drugs to treat leaky gut, but sometimes the medical approach is exactly what messes it up, right? For example, risk factors for getting leaky gut is stomach acid medication. So that's like the, that purple pill with like the yellow stripes on it. Or if you take antibiotics are a risk factor for developing leaky gut. But it can also be things like ibuprofens and Advil and different kinds of non-steroidal anti-inflammatories that can cause the same process. And so what happens is this is actually all happening on a cellular level, right? And so when you have leaky gut, it can go all the way through. It affects the heart, obviously. It affects the brain. It causes neuroinflammation. You get microglial activation, which, like I said, we're going to be talking about a little bit later in the series. And really and truly, the more your brain is inflamed, the faster it degenerates. And we see things like Alzheimer's and dementia start to develop. And so one of the things, what can we do, right? Like here, it's not just about, we're not here to just talk about all the bad things and see it. But if you're having some of those symptoms that were on the last slide, like what are some of the things that we can do? Because there's so many things that this could really lead to, right? So the first thing is we want to support digestion, right? And so that's from the class from last week where we talked about activating the brain, chewing our food really, really good, making sure that we have a high amount of enzymes. And so, of course, we talked about vertizymes last week as, of course, a huge recommendation from us as far as like getting these as foundational into your system just to help you out, right? Because remember, it's all happening at the cellular level, right? And then, we want to stop eating inflammatory foods, right? So, and that's different for everybody. Everybody has their own set of inflammatory foods. So it's not, I can't really give you a list specifically of these are the foods you should, stop eating. It's all about your personal body, right? I will say that we should avoid alcohol as much as possible. De-stress and unwind is huge. Remember, we're nourishing the brain. We're calming that vagus nerve that goes from the brain all the way down to our gut. And, we want to be mindful of medications. Eat more apples. I will tell you, that's a key one. I love throwing that one in. There are so many benefits in apples that will really help with this process. And there's some really great nutrients in there that just are kind of unique to apples. I think they're also maybe in some varieties of pears, but mostly eat more apples. Get moving, right? That's a huge one, right? Get restorative sleep, right? And specifically restorative sleep, right? Because it's not just about going to sleep every night. It's about actually having that sleep cycle where we're restoring and we're repairing, right? We're regenerating. And select supportive supplements. And you can consider probiotics with a higher purpose. I'm going to get to that in just 1 second. And so as we begin, I want you to see that there's this huge, like it's all connected, right? So when you either you have symptoms of leaky gut or maybe you meet somebody with symptoms of leaky gut, it's easy to assume that some of these like leaky gut is just a gut problem, right? But leaky gut is not a gut problem at all, right? It's actually an immune system issue. And it's not actually a problem. It's the immune system doing what it's supposed to do, but it's just kind of gotten like off track a little bit, right? And so it's the immune system doing what it's supposed to. It started in the gut, but it really ultimately its final destination is the immune system, and it kind of wreaks havoc across the entire body. And so by addressing the root cause, then your symptoms start to improve, right? But this is why we follow the specific roadmap, which we've outlined over the last few weeks, because this is what helps your body to rebalance and reset and regenerate itself, right? And so when you do this, you can start to get back the energy to do the things again. I've talked to people that are like, oh, I'll never have gluten ever again. If you begin to heal the body, you can actually begin to, reintroduce some of the things you might remove temporarily, because as the body heals and the body has more nourishment and more tools to support itself, then you find yourself with more energy, and you find yourself not reacting to the things that you reacted before. So I want to go to the last point here, which was consider probiotics with a higher purpose. And so for our soul connection piece, you know, I've been talking about digestion for 2 weeks, and we started with brain coming down into the gut. And at the very, very end of digestion, this is where probiotics come into play after we get into that intestinal phase. And the reason why I said probiotics with a higher purpose is because I find it necessary to not just like, we're not just taking like one type of probiotic. We want to look at a supplement that can really nourish all the parts. And so to give us a little bit about this, my favorite probiotic supplement, which is Probio IQ, of course, from Soul Naturals. In our Soul Connection piece tonight, we have Greg Halliday to share with us just a little bit of Probio IQ. Obviously, it's a product that we could be talking about for weeks, but share with us what you can in tonight's segment.
Thank you, Erica. Be happy to do that. I need to pull myself out of my learning zen that I always go into while you're speaking, because I can just keep listening to you. Such super interesting stuff. And the probiotic portion of this actually fits into that, how would you describe it? But that there's this saying that, you know, something is just the tip of the iceberg. Something that is known is just a little piece of what it truly entails. And probiotics and our understanding of them in the body, it fits perfectly into that comparison. Because I'm actually amazed. In fact, just a couple of days ago, Dr. Allison sent me 2 other articles on some very interesting strains and what key things they change and influence in the body. These are new strains that you're not going to see, not that they're new, but they're not strains common in the marketplace. There's so much to learn from them, and they do play a key role in today's discussion. A lot of the things that Erica was teaching us. And in fact, in talking about Probio IQ, clearly there's a little bit of a message in the title of the product, the name of the product, that goes in agreement with what Erica's been teaching us, where you go from north to south if you want to change something, and starting right with the head, because we do have these wonderful probiotics throughout. First of all, a little did you know, okay, Probio IQ, the IQ references mental clarity. It's yellow. It's this part of that clarify. But it's much, much more than that. It really is, to achieve any kind of mental clarity, it needs to be complete and systemic, right? What we're doing, what we're clarifying. And it is a variety of probiotic. It is a combination of 6 different probiotic strains and 2 wonderful herbs. Both of them are probably adaptogenic. One of them for sure is. The second one probably is. And then 2 other soluble but acid-resistant fibers in a tiny amount to grab all these probiotics and the wonderful adaptogens that are combined with them and carry them, as we talked about last week with Vertizymes, deeper into the digestive tract. So that quality, that aspect in Probio IQ is the same as the one in Vertizymes. So both the enzyme combination, remember it was a combination of herbs and enzymes, and this really double huge variety of proteases, all carried by these wonderful fibers. Probio is like that as well. So that's kind of the nature of it. You've got this variety of probiotic strains, and you've got these wonderful adaptogens with it, and a carrier. The interesting thing, well, to me, it's interesting. But if you remember just a couple of things, 2 or 3 things from what I shared tonight, please know that the strains in Probio IQ are not picked because of popularity or commonness of use. They actually are selected based upon a dual activity where they elevate mood and regulate our stress response in a way that's more pronounced than other probiotic strains. That was one characteristic. Nothing got included in ProBioIQ that does not do that. So it is a special group of probiotics. It happens, of course, that all of the strains that do have that special influence on our stress response and mood and various specific cognitive functions also play key roles in the gut. Well, naturally, because of what we've been learning, that goes almost without saying. First, these are from Dr. Allison Caldwell-Andrews. Your particular mix of bacteria play a key role very early in your life in programming how you handle stress. Let that one just settle in for a minute and meditate on that. One of the more interesting studies I read shows how throughout the world there are patterns of probiotics that these researchers liken to almost like blood type that actually cross cultural, economic, and geographic barriers. In other words, there's not a pattern there that in this geography, people have this pattern. It's not like that. But there are unique patterns or varieties of dominant probiotics. So they program how we manage stress. They play a role in it. I'm not saying they program the whole thing, but they play a programming role. Secondly, probiotics have a huge influence on the responsivity of how we manage stress. So thinking about north to south and starting with right here, probiotics start right here. And in fact, the variety that we include, think of why we selected the 6 in ProBioIQ and the amounts and what else we do, because Erica talked about all the things that can affect them, either by allowing them to proliferate or by killing them. Okay, we can affect it either way. They directly influence in a major way how we handle stress. And it's very specific. The studies will reference directly our HPA axis. Okay, so jumping down to a couple of facts. I just wanted to start with those two because they are kind of the crux. This is so interesting to me from Dr. Allison, is right from Erica's talk tonight, permeability of the gut, and how stress has such a huge effect on gut permeability, allowing bacteria and bacterial antigens to cross it, altering our microbiome continually. Lots of data from irritable bowel and major depression indicate that these, when they come, they find an alteration from to the HPA, to sort of the hypothalamus, pituitary, adrenal, that axis, as they like to call it, that is induced by our gut permeability. So what Erica is talking about tonight is right at the, just as she said, is right at the center of all of this, and stress management being the place to start and the place that can never, ever be ignored, and why all of the formulas of Solle address that along with the other things. Okay, so I'm going to jump. Those were kind of a couple of introductory from Dr. Allison. I'm just going to mention this. Okay, the strains. First one, not super known by people, called Saccharomyces boulardii. Studies with children. Lots of intestinal studies dealing with fungus and other things that cause inflammation, greatly reducing when this probiotic is introduced and proliferated in the system. In the case of the children, it was a rotavirus study. The next one is Lactobacillus helveticus. I'm sorry, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these tonight, just in the interest of time, because I want to talk through one of the strains with you tonight. Helveticus, I'll just tell you, in the British Journal of Nutrition, significant changes, positive changes in anger, anxiety, problem solving, and other symptoms of stressful conditions that are different in each of us. We all manifest it differently, though we have commonality. That's Helveticus is the second one. Bifidophilus longum, super famous, getting more and more and more fame because it is so important and key. It is truly kind of a diesel truck in terms of the load it can carry in our gut. And exactly, sorry, not what word am I looking for? Specifically in the topic of tonight, of leaky gut and just intestinal health and permeability. But equally well, that one is studied in a bunch of reports with Helveticus, those two together, and a huge boost in stress management when those particular two. So think of the patterns and stress programming and stress responsivity of the body. Those two were key. And when we saw that, they were a slam dunk to include as the 6. Now, probiotic IQ actually started out with 5. We added a 6th one later because it was so compelling. And I'll tell you, it's the 6th one that I wanted to mention in more detail tonight. But these are the original 5. Lactobacillus casei is the 3rd. Lots of studies about stress and mood. Lactobacillus sporogenes is the 4th. It is heat resistant. And so, because I've mentioned all 5, Boulardii, Helveticus, long Bifidophilus, casei, and sporogenes. Those are the 5. Okay, so now we're on the last one. The last one is this big, long German word name, Propionibacterium freudenreichii, which is named after the researcher. I would say discover, but really it's the one who defined in detail, along with a partner in research. A couple of things we should know about. It comes from a group that is beneficial, the Propionum bacteria group. They actually are found in our skin too, in the acnes group. That's a pathogenic group. These are the good guys, not from that group, from the same genus, but a different group. They've been used, Propionum bacteria have been used to make Swiss cheeses, just so you know. They are considered, they are given GRAS status, GRAS, generally regarded as safe, GRAS. And aside from the safety, a slew of health promoting properties have now been identified through quite extensive study. It is a slower growing bacteria. It does not need much nutrient. It is exceptionally hardy, survives at room temperature actually for a very long time. It adapts efficiently and rapidly to stressful environments, and in a variety of situations, humans, because we got a lot of different things going on in our guts, it is quite remarkable how it can survive in many. It is shown to adhere very well to the gut wall. So Erica was kind of showing us the picture in there. Some bacteria are better than others at staying with us. Some just float through more, and we have to, I'm talking about good bacteria, and we have to replenish more. Propione is better at adhering. Okay, what are a few things that it does real quickly? First of all, it actually generates fatty acids, short chain fatty acids, which protect intestinal lining. So think of what Erica's talked about today, intestinal lining. It actually downgrades a certain protein that is pro-inflammatory and pro-abnormal cell. Sorry, I said downgrades, I think downregulates this, so inhibits it, ratchets it down. This bacteria produces substances which support the absorption of calcium, magnesium, and potassium. So in other words, you're eating it and you're going to actually see it and use it better because of this bacteria, instead of just flushing your money through, which can happen, right? It produces bacteriocins, which are lethal to bacteria, which inhibit gram-negative bacteria, a variety of yeasts, a variety of molds. Another. It's also antifungal. Well, I mentioned that in the last study. This is just a separate study I'm reading, and it's antiviral. Here's another biggie. It actually produces or synthesizes B vitamins. So this bacteria, which is the 6th strain in ProbioIQ, produces B8, B9, and B12. In the case of B12, there's some interesting facts to say around it. But before I get to the B12 in more detail, so B8's biotin, right? A lot of interest in biotin for skin and other health, and folate. A lot of interest in where I can get this. This bacteria does it. ProbioIQ has little factories. These probiotic strains, that's what they are. Okay, so on the B12, Sometimes we think B12 is B12 is B12. Dr. Allison in this training reminded everybody that spirulina, miso, nori, and wakame, I think I'm pronouncing that right, they all have B12, but the form they contain is actually known as pseudo vitamin B12. What that does is it has a similar chemical structure, but it actually can be harmful because what it does is it takes up the absorption space and blocks the body's ability to assimilate the active B12. She calls it analog B12 or the pseudo vitamin B12. So sometimes you'll see printed that these things, now spirulina has lots of other good nutrients, but people will talk about B12. Yeah, not a thing there. And in fact, in terms of B12, that's actually getting in the way. So you want this bacteria. Here's another interesting point. It actually generates electricity. There's a certain amount of millivolts. I'm trying to think of how much it is. Yes, energy, which again, another tip of the iceberg thing in the body, is something that probiotic strains actually can provide certain of them, and P. freudin reishi is one of them. Okay, I mentioned about certain fatty acids. CLA is what it produces, and CLA has to do with regulating blood glucose, reducing body fat, preserving muscle, preserving airways and lungs. It has lots of great effects, tons, right? That's just three that they talked about in this article. It also is a stimulator to the other friendly flora. When you have freudin reishi in your system, the others grow better. Why does it do that? Well, a couple of things that it does. It actually produces things that kill other harmful bacteria and make it hard for them to adhere to the cell walls. Whereas with good bacteria, in particular, one of the studies was on Bifidophilus, they will colonize more readily with freudin reishi in them. Because so you got this dual thing of anti-adhesive action for the bad stuff and helping the good stuff. An example of the bad stuff, H. pylori, this bacteria propionum inhibits the H. pylori adhering to the intestinal wall. So that was a whole study on that. It also can bind to harmful mycotoxins, either neutralizing or removing them, This bacteria, it binds to certain heavy metals like cadmium and lead so that the body can remove them. It can bind to harmful plant lectins. That was another study that she shared. So the list is long. I'm going to stop there because I've talked for a while, but these probiotics, you can see why we added a few years after the original formula. The P. freudin reishi is such a powerhouse, and it's just taken that formula, which was already wonderful, to just beyond another level. So thank you, Dr. Allison. Another reason why ProbioIQ, that's an easy one to, even at a 1 capsule a day maintenance, you get 2 months out of 1 bottle, or if you're working on things, you determine how much the need is, but it doesn't take much to do that daily. All right, Erica, back to you.
I love it. Yeah, I think this is another one of those products that I could talk about or listen to you talk about all day. So I do want to, I'm going to address a few questions. One of them was, I saw, can men get leaky gut? The answer is yes, because we have the same, we basically have the same muscles and proteins and everything in our gut lining, men and women. And continuing back, there was another question. Let's see, I saw it about being allergic to gluten. So I wanted to address the gluten issue real quick. So if you are digesting properly, like if you're chewing really, really good, and if your enzymes are really, are at their proper level in the, and your stomach acids are in the proper level and everything else, gluten should actually not be a problem for you. But there's a couple of caveats I'm going to throw in here. In America, in the West here, we have different gluten like proteins because of pesticides and stuff that they have to put on our food. So that's actually adapted the food itself. So like if you go to Europe, their breads and stuff that they make over there, their gluten in those foods are completely different, right? And they have like ancient grains. The glutens in those foods are completely different. So here in America and here in the West, our gluten proteins and like breads and stuff, the processed types of foods are a little bit different, in pastas and things like that, are a little bit different in structure. That being said, for a healthy gut, if your enzymes are right and your stomach acid is right and you're chewing properly and your brain function is right, it really shouldn't bother you. But if you have something going on in your body, then yes. So as far as when gluten gets into the intestinal lining, is it pretty much always going to bother you? If gluten gets in its whole form to the intestine, it's probably going to irritate the lining and cause an inflammatory response every time. So that's why when I talk about digestion, I'm talking about that north to south protocol. Like we have to get brain function and brain activation going. We need to chew really, really well. We need to make sure we have the right enzymatic properties and stomach acids going on there. Of course, we want to support the liver and the pancreas as well, because those are the support organs there, gallbladder, all those kinds of things. And then we're getting into our small intestine. So to answer that on allergic to gluten, that's in a nutshell the answer. And I love this, need to buy apples. Yes, buy apples. They're like such a perfect food. It's interesting. I actually, I interned very early in my career with a doctor whose specialty was holistic cancer therapies. And the first thing he did with every single one of his clients was put them on what's called a mono diet, means you eat one food, right? But you can eat as much of that food as you want, so you're never hungry, but you only eat one food. You know what that food was? Apples. He put every single person on a mono diet of apples. And there's a lot of reasons why he did that. It helps to, give the digestive, energy and all kinds of stuff, but apples are pretty phenomenal.
But let me tell you this. So we always put adaptogens specifically for the function of what they do on both sides. And in the probiotic, I didn't even mention, I'm sorry. Why? No, I didn't mention the two herbs, Bacopa monnieri and reishi mushroom. And one thing that reishi is a prebiotic.
This is what I can tell you about Probio IQ. It's literally my favorite. I've seen lots of probiotics in my career, and this is one that gets me excited. I had somebody tell me like that I get excited about all the products, and maybe I do, but this one gets me really, really excited. And because when I tell you it's probiotics with a higher purpose, I'm serious. Like this formula, like systemically, like works all over. And we don't think about probiotics like that, right? Normally they just go to the colon, we keep a few of them, the rest of them leave our body, and that's why we have to keep taking them forever. Probio IQ is totally different. And so, but what I know about Probio IQ is it does help our body with malabsorption and assimilation issues. So if that's some of the issues, I know Probio IQ would definitely be a good addition to your program. Let me see what else. I saw another one. Oh, is leaky gut related to all to autoimmune diseases? Yes, pretty much every autoimmune disease has a leaky gut connection. That's like, it's almost how you got the autoimmune disease. Very rarely, well, I would say really never, but we'll say very rarely just for the numbers. Very rarely will you ever see an autoimmune disease of any type without a leaky gut connection. But that's why it's important to remember the intestinal permeability part. It's our body's natural thing. Like it's actually supposed to happen. It's part of our immune system. It's how our body helps it. We absorb nutrients, we eliminate waste, and we get rid of pathogens, right, through that process. I love it. Thank you so much for that comment. Your excitement is contagious. Go ahead and get excited. I get excited. I get excited about these formulas, and I think I could talk about them all day. Somebody told me that if you find something that you could just like, you get excited and you could just talk about all day, that you can turn that into your career and you'll never work another day in your life. And I kind of feel like that every single time I get to start talking about soul in general. It never feels like work to me. So I love it. I appreciate every single one of you who took the time out. I especially appreciate you, Greg, for coming every Tuesday night to share with us. So much love for that. And we can't wait to see you guys next week. And until then, keep sharing soul and keep inviting people.